Call. The Radical Innovation Summit is about to start.
Bienvenidos nuevamente a todos ustedes. Espero que hayan disfrutado su coffee break. Vamos a seguir con nuestro programa ahora con un segundo panel sobre Freedom to Transact, regulaciones cripto, viendo hacia el futuro, moving forward. Tenemos un extraordinario panel moderado por Angela Brasington de Andromeda. Angela.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Y perdón, Kasia Szczypska, the Open Dialogue Foundation. Kasia, I'm sorry if I couldn't pronounce it. ¿Y qué creen? De regreso aquí en México, el ganador del Shark Tank del año pasado, Grant McCarty, del Bitcoin Policy Institute. Angela, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. We're so glad to be here today. You heard the earlier discussion on the freedom to transact and crypto innovations moving forward. So that's what we're going to talk to you a little bit about. So I'm Angela Brasington, Chief of Ecosystem at Andromeda, Web3's first operating system, and the president of Web3 University, which empowers and educates students on Web3 and blockchain technology with the tools, AOS, Andromeda's operating system, to teach them how to get there and engage in Web3. And I'm here with Kasia Szczypska from Open Dialogue Foundation. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
And Grant McCarty from Bitcoin Policy Institute. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, to get this conversation started, I want to open up a question to both of you and ask, how do you envision an ideal regulatory environment that balances innovation in crypto with necessary safeguards? What are the key principles that should guide policymakers?
All right, you take this one.
Well, why do I think, when I think ideal regulatory environment, like it sounds so oxymoronic to me, but ideally, I would like it to protect rights as a presupposition, not curtailing rights. But from our practice, I come from a human rights group that is also an advocacy group. So we come to policymakers and show them how we use freedom tech. I think it should just start with inviting everyone to the table. So what we are on a mission, one of our mission is just to create a space where policymakers actually hear out various people affected by their regulations. And as we deal mostly with Bitcoin, those are, end users, people who use it to protect rights, but also developers, the industry. So that's our starting point.
Definitely. Some of the big things that we focus on at the Bitcoin Policy Institute are, yes, protecting individual rights for consumers, people who want to, transact with something like Bitcoin. A few of those rights might be, the right to mine Bitcoin, right? Where we shouldn't ban Bitcoin mining or other forms of cryptocurrency from operating and using the consensus mechanisms that they use to operate. People should be able to hold their own, Bitcoin or other digital assets. We shouldn't have to rely on third parties, right, to hold our digital assets. That's part of the whole innovation of Bitcoin, is that you can be your own bank. And as soon as we do away with individual ownership of this technology, we've effectively created banks 2.0, right? We've just created banks again. So protecting those individual rights is huge. You hear this all the time. We need to balance innovation, or we need to protect innovation while also protecting consumers. And what does that look like in practice? The principles that we focus on are go after bad actors, don't go after things on a protocol level, right? So don't ban a technology because you are scared of the implications of that technology. Do go after bad actors who are scamming people, who are committing fraud. And that is unfortunately pretty rampant in the cryptocurrency space. There are a lot of people who have weaponized this technology to take advantage of everyday people. And so for policymakers, one of the big things that we tell them to focus on, because they're going to regulate, they want to do something. You can't sit by while billions and billions of dollars are being stolen from people or being, transacted with criminal groups across the world. So what's the big thing that they should focus on? We think that regulation should focus on transparency, right? Give consumers the information that they need in order to make decisions on their own, and let them decide if something has value or if something is worth investing in or transacting in. And right now, almost every bad situation that we've seen with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is a company that is weaponizing a lack of transparency. They're taking advantage of consumers because they have insider information, they created a token, they know everything about it, and grandma and grandpa don't know anything about it, and then the people who created it are taking advantage of it. If our laws and regulations focus on transparency, I think we'll be in a good spot.
Really well said. So, Grant, back to you. The U.S. has seen various attempts at crypto regulation, from the infrastructure bill to recent SEC actions. What do you think are the most pressing challenges or developments in the U.S. today? And how can they inform policy decisions?
Definitely. So, unfortunately, policy is largely driven by the biggest things that are in news headlines and the biggest scandals, right? There have been some massive, massive scandals in the cryptocurrency space, and that means that when things are good, policymakers aren't really looking to do anything, and then when things are really bad, they get a lot of pressure, hey, fix this, why didn't you stop this? So ultimately, we've seen policy as the result of bad things happening. There's been it was mentioned earlier today, kind of a consistent attack on open source developers that I think is really concerning. And this goes back to what I was saying about, hey, let's regulate, go after bad actors, but you shouldn't be regulating technology just for existing. You shouldn't be punishing people for creating or writing code. And so if you've heard it mentioned, I would encourage you all to look into the Samurai Wallet case, Samurai Wallet and the Tornado Cash case. And the reason this is so concerning, and it's in the US but around the world, is people wrote open source protocols, they created software, bad people used that software, and now they're being punished for creating the software that bad people used, even though they didn't commit the crime, right? So that has severe implications because if you're punishing tools for existing, the next person who creates like a hammer, is now liable for whatever somebody does with that hammer. That's really concerning. And I would say that is probably the principal development that we're watching out for.
Thank you, thank you. And Kasia, from a European perspective, what are the most significant regulatory developments affecting the crypto ecosystem? And how do they compare to what we're seeing in the US and Latin America?
So I think I want to go back, where are we actually coming from? So Open Dialogue Foundation, we do monitor the space, especially the Bitcoin regulations, and this is the reason for it is that Bitcoin is the most potent tool we know of to protect human rights, so we use it in our daily efforts. So we do, and it's a part of like crypto regulations, so we do monitor the scene, and the reason for that is that we were sort of forced to do it, so it was not by choice. Just certain regulations were weaponized against us, and that made us, just activists, human rights defenders, got involved in this area. So the story goes that back in 2019, we were debanked in Brussels, so in the heart of Europe, really. And we just received an email one day that our accounts are closed, the account of the Open Dialogue Foundation, but also of the leadership. And then we pilgrimaged to all banks in Belgium, and no one wanted to open a bank account for us. And long story short, and it concerns the black box of IML, anti-money laundering regulations, and it took us months to decipher. It transpired that we were just on the blacklist of banks because doing the job we do, being human rights defenders and fighting for political prisoners in authoritarian countries, there is a lot of smear online campaign on us, and that red flagged us for banks. So then we resorted to Bitcoin, and we survived on Bitcoin. And overall, in the end, it was quite serendipitous because we discovered Bitcoin for our daily activities. And since then, we used it to deliver humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We are educating activists in authoritarian countries to use Bitcoin. But being human rights defender involved in international advocacy, so our job is to go to policymakers and try to work out better regulations with them. We simply, so basically, sorry.
No, you're great. I mean, that's an amazing story. I love how you just took a problem, an absolute problem, and turned it around. I'm a big fan of being a problem solver, but then using Bitcoin as your solution is kind of amazing. I love that.
Yeah, but what we cannot afford really is this hostile language and punitive language and restrictive language that is coming from policymakers. So we are trying to counteract it, and the attacks are various, coming from the on the ground of IML, anti-money laundering, and counter-financing terrorism regulations. Also criticizing Bitcoin from environmental grounds, climate change grounds, and so on. So we just try to be active on all of those fronts and knock on all the doors we can and show those policymakers how we actually use Bitcoin for good humanitarian purposes.
Really quickly, your story is unfortunately more common than it should be. This idea that they are risky to do business with, right? And this is, to go back to your question, it's how does Europe and the United States and Latin America compare? This is common all over the world, right? And I think, unfortunately, it is something that everybody in this room, there's a possibility that you have to contend with this, which is, you're here, you believe in personal freedoms, you believe in speaking your mind, you believe in, working on problems that matter to you and that are likely going to be disruptive. And unfortunately, the louder that you are, the greater risk that you are to the powers that be, and the more likely that it is that somebody weaponizes their power to try to silence you. And so in the financial sector, this is what we're seeing really often. People who work in the Bitcoin space, people who work in the crypto space, people who are on, work primarily focusing on human rights, are being punished because what they're saying is threatening people in power who want to keep that power. And that could be at the government level, that could be at a private level. But again, this is something that is common everywhere. And I think, you can be upset about it. You can, you can cry yourself to sleep thinking about it because it's awful. But you can also go in eyes wide open and understand, hey, this is the world that we live in. This is how things work. And how do we deal with it? And this is why something like crypto and some of the, and Bitcoin or these amazing technologies, because they offer you an alternative, right? If for some reason you are debanked because of your views or your beliefs, now you have an alternative that can't silence you, that can't debank you. And the freedom that offers, simply the existence of that alternative, is something that I think is so incredibly powerful, because now it gives you the opportunity to speak up, to speak your mind, to act out your beliefs and live the way that you want to live, and knowing that, hey, even if a few things go wrong, it's not over. It's not over for me. There are alternatives. There are people who view the world the way that I do, and there are systems that will allow me to keep going. Whereas 15 years ago, these systems did not exist.
So well said. Really, really well said. Let's talk about something you brought up earlier, which is balancing innovation with regulation, something that always comes up when we talk about crypto regulation. So how can we ensure that regulations protect consumers without stifling innovation? The age-old.
Sure. I won't rehash everything from the first answer, but again, to touch on this transparency piece, I think it's completely fine. One of the things that we talk about with lawmakers. They're concerned about securities laws and regulations. They're concerned about, hey, how do these new technologies fit within existing frameworks? And again, the thing that we hammer home is like all of the problems that you were trying to solve for policymakers to protect people, they don't require, the state co-opting these technologies. They don't require these massive, surveillance regimes where they have to know everything that's going on at every moment. But there is value, again, if they're going to do something, if they're going to regulate some of these technologies or these companies, to just ensure that these companies are doing a better job of being honest with their consumers. And this is not anything new, right? If you run a bank or a financial services company today, you have obligations, fiduciary duties to your customers, and you have things that you have to be honest about. And unfortunately, a lot of new disruptive technologies have said, well, we're not going to be honest with our consumers. That's fraud. Like that's just, a crime is a crime is a crime. So how do we protect consumers? You just write laws that tell companies not to lie to consumers. And I promise you that solves like the majority of the issues that we see in the Bitcoin and crypto space. 99% of problems in the space are a result of like human fallibility and fraud. So deal with the fraud, and a lot of the other stuff works itself out, and the market can still do its thing.
Thank you. And Kasia, your foundation works at the intersection of human rights and Bitcoin. Can you share some compelling examples of how Bitcoin has impacted refugees or disadvantaged communities, and how we could potentially learn from that?
Absolutely. With our experience of being debunked, we started actually searching for, and as you, Grant, mentioned, there are lots of cases like that. So we started searching for allies and for people who experience the same hardships as we did. We formed this coalition called BTC, if you will, Building True Change Coalition, which gathers freedom fighters from across the world who either suffered being debunked or who use Bitcoin on a daily basis for their fight for freedom. But we also include their educators from the space, also industry leaders and practitioners. When it comes to some wonderful cases of Bitcoin protecting rights, well, there is a plethora of cases. And as you, Grant, said, on a philosophical level, I don't think it's realized enough that we do live in a totally different universe right now since Bitcoin was created, because we do now have a choice. Bitcoin just reversed the equation of sovereignty, giving back sovereignty to the people. And the example is, I will maybe list some cases from our coalition. For example, one of my cases that is super inspiring to me is Roya Mahub. She's an Afghani woman, and she was the first tech CEO in Afghanistan. She was on a mission to help out Afghani women to be productive, to work, but her concern was she didn't know how to pay them, so it doesn't get confiscated by their husbands, brothers, dads, you name it, and then she discovered Bitcoin. So today she educated hundreds of Afghani women about Bitcoin, and now they can be independent, they can participate in the global market, and there are also this story goes on because, for example, when the Taliban came again to Afghanistan, some of them were able to make it in the countries they left, for example, to Germany, because they crossed all the borders with having 12 phrases engraved in their mind, which helped them to protect their wealth. And if you think of it, that even 10 years ago, if you think of big refugees crisis or even Holocaust, whatever, people didn't have a way to take their wealth with them to escape such a crisis. But we have plenty of cases, we have, democracy activists from Togo who are able to organize protests against the government because Bitcoin gives them anonymity. But okay, and there are many, and I could talk for a long time now. But I want to list one more case because I don't know whether Carlinhos is here in the audience. So we have, if you have a chance, please talk to him because we have a wonderful new case here. Carlinhos and his colleagues from Simple Proof just use Bitcoin blockchain to secure elections in Guatemala. This is, to me, historic case, first such case where voting tallies were written on the Bitcoin blockchain, and in that way, like, it just gave election another layer of security. Yeah, so those are some of examples.
I love to hear them. I can just sit and listen all day to these amazing impact stories. But let's talk about the key issues now. To both of you, how can we ensure that crypto regulation protects the right to self-custody while preserving the permissionless nature of blockchain technologies? What are the key battles on this front?
So you will hear a term that's thrown around pretty often. You'll hear like KYC, AML, and what this is referring to is know your customer anti-money laundering laws. Largely, a lot of these laws are created, they're passed in order to deal with terrorism and terrorist financing, criminal financing. My perspective, and I think this is not I'm not the only one who has this perspective, is that largely what these laws end up doing, when you look empirically, even though they are created to limit criminal financing, money laundering, these types of things, what they do is they create significant regulatory and surveillance regimes that ultimately pass a bunch of costs on companies, they pass a bunch of costs on consumers in order to comply with these regulations, right? And in practice, what this might look like is when you download a financial app, PayPal or something like that, they need to take certain information about you, and they might need to take your full name and your address and your government identity number and all these things, right, to confirm that you are who you say that you are, that if you do something wrong, illegal with that money, that they have, they know who you are and they can go after you, right? If every single company that's dealing with money has to comply with these laws, it adds a lot of cost, right? And unfortunately, I think the data suggests these laws actually do a really bad job of stopping criminals from laundering money and from moving their money. And instead, they just create billions and billions of dollars in overhead and increase fees on consumers. And by and large, law-abiding citizens are the ones that end up paying the price, basically, both money-wise and, again, to the debanking component. Your bank accounts will get shut down, they'll get flagged, your money will be held because of suspicious activity. And again, the data says criminals move their money one way or another. They figure it out, regardless of these laws. And so law-abiding people end up paying the price. How does this relate to your question? Well, something like Bitcoin is open source, it's decentralized, there's no central intermediary or third party who is holding your money, right? And this is different than anything before this, right? If you're sending money on PayPal, I send you money on PayPal, I send it, and on the way, PayPal holds my funds. When it's in your PayPal account, you're not holding that money, PayPal is holding your money, right? This is known as a money transmitter or a money service business. And sorry, I'm getting in the weeds here, but basically, they've got to comply with laws, just like a bank has to comply with laws. They're holding your money. Yeah, they've got to do certain things. With something like Bitcoin, I'm holding my money. And if I send you Bitcoin, you're holding your money. So why do we have to comply with the same regulations that a bank would have to comply with, right? And this is where self-custody is under attack, right? Governments want to surveil these transactions. They want to include these KYC, AML, know your customer, anti-money laundering laws, and they want to impose them on peer-to-peer transactions. And ultimately, if we consider, sending Bitcoin as functionally the same as if I were to give you a $20 bill, if I were to give you cash, well, imagine if you had to sign a form every single time that you handed somebody cash. to confirm that you are a legal, law-abiding citizen, and you had to give them your social security number and all these things. That is ultimately what is many countries are trying to get us to adopt, essentially. And ultimately, the final point of this is like, because this technology is decentralized, because it's peer-to-peer, you actually can't comply with that, right? If you're using like a Bitcoin wallet app, they never hold your money, so they can't fill out the same forms that a bank would have to fill out. They don't know all the information about who's sending money to who. So these laws are being created saying, hey, we're here to protect you, we want to stop criminals, but they're actually like physically impossible for these technologies and these companies to comply with. And so functionally what it's doing is it will make it illegal to self-custody Bitcoin. It'll make it illegal to conduct peer-to-peer transactions, because they're saying if you don't follow this law, you're breaking the law if you don't follow these rules, but you can't physically follow the rules. So this is a really kind of sneaky, gross thing that is gaining a lot of momentum, and the worst part about it is all under the guise of, hey, we're here to protect you. We just want to stop bad people. You'll be fine. The reality is you won't be fine. You're going to be the one paying the price.
Y'all get that? You can drop the mic at any time if you'd like, because that was great. But I do want to ask you about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Could you elaborate a little bit on the potential impact of CBDCs on the ecosystem, particularly in relation to Bitcoin?
Sure. So the best way to look at this is Bitcoin, open source, no third party, no centralized intermediary, right? Truly peer-to-peer. I send you money, you receive money. Yes, there's a public blockchain that you can track these transactions on, but there's nobody holding our money in between. There's a growing concept of central bank digital currencies where a lot of governments are looking around and they go, man, this crypto thing, really interesting. It can make payments faster, cheaper, the whole system can be better. You know what I don't like? That we don't control it. And so that's where central bank digital currencies have gained a lot of popularity is, you can get all the benefits of crypto while the government controls it. And in terms of the implications of that, what it would mean is, again, we will just be creating neobanks, right? Like your bank already operates in that way. If I send you money on the bank, like, or through my bank or through Zelle or PayPal, right now there's a layer of separation between the government and your financial institution. But if the government wants to know who sent who money, they'll subpoena that information and they can find it out, right? And with the central bank digital currency, essentially the government will control this crypto. They will be able to see every single transaction, who has sent money to who. Everybody will be a known user on that. And then ultimately, I think we have to be honest about human nature and about the nature of governments and realize that this will be weaponized. And it'll be weaponized against, again, law-abiding citizens who are unfavorable, essentially. So it will allow the government to censor transactions, to stop transactions. You could impose negative interest rates in order to stimulate spending. The point is right now, even if you don't love our financial system, there's at least one layer of separation between the government. A central bank digital currency would remove even that layer, and it would make everything under the purview of a central bank.
Thank you. So
I will just add to that, because I had an interesting conversation this morning with Pavel on this, that I think it's still worthy to look at it from a larger perspective that, well, yes, there is this danger of CBDCs. There is this question whether it will materialize or not. I actually, oddly enough, last year I was speaking at the Central Bankers Conference here in Mexico. That was my first time to Mexico, a weird introduction. And those were central bankers who are drafting CBDCs, and it was interesting to see the clashes within them, and so, some of them actually didn't believe they will actually succeed in this. But what I really want to say is that regardless of whether CBDCs will be implemented, and we should be very watchful, I agree with Pavel's great statement that it's just a case more of just being very vigilant about government just getting getting from us our like financial freedom, financial autonomy, because if they would like to do it right now, they still can through the legacy financial system, or even like with cash. They can, you can buy stuff and they can ask you for ID. So they already have those tools. So it's a just more general issue of just guarding our financial sovereignty.
Yeah, just really quickly, whether or not a CBDC is created or adopted in your country, the most important thing is not necessarily whether it's created, it's whether you have an option to use an alternative, right? So do you still have the option to transact with cash? Do you still have the option to use Bitcoin? And the existence of these other options, these alternatives, like that competition, that is the juice, that is the value, right? The unfortunate, reality that, again, I'm contending with is I think a lot of these centralized options will ultimately come with either implicit or explicit mandates of usage. And so you can see this with some of the countries that have adopted central bank digital currencies is the amount of cash that's in circulation is actually like going down and CBDCs are going up. So it's limiting people's ability to transact with cash, and it's forcing you to this centralized technology or centralized government tool. But again, as long as something like Bitcoin exists and as long as it is not illegal to use in your country, then a CBDC can exist and you can operate outside of that system or separately from that system, or you can use a CBDC when you want it, because maybe it will be useful. Maybe it will be nice to have every single, grocery store and convenience store just, I don't know, like use your little phone CBDC. Maybe that will be nice. But if you have to use it for everything, I think that is the concern.
Yeah, because then the eyes are on them. Kasia, regarding the campaign to stop the planned ban on Bitcoin mining in Norway, what are the key arguments that you're presenting, and how might they guide policymakers?
So our most recent campaign was to counteract the ban on mining in Norway, which the idea popped up like just a few months ago, and it is supposed to happen by the end of the year. And then, by the way, we got an official response from the Digital and Public Administration of Norway, saying that they do not want to hold any public consultation. So, which is insane, because we have again regulators that want to regulate Bitcoin mining industry, not understanding it yet. They are not ready and open to listen to the voices coming from the industry. So I must, much to our chagrin, we emailed and contacted over 200 policymakers in Norway, both on local and regional, on a national level, and haven't really faced such resistance for quite a bit. But generally the way we go about it is, again, like what we find the most effective way of conducting our advocacy is just using use cases. Especially with Bitcoin being, there is a steep learning curve with Bitcoin, and it's just complicated if you have 30 minutes with a policymaker and you want to explain to him what Bitcoin is, that will just backfire. So what we just do is, in terms of Bitcoin mining, we just present cases from the EU, but also across the globe of how it brings social benefits. So whether it is fostering the adoption of renewables, whether it is stabilizing the grid, whether it is, even like cases from Africa, like electrifying African villages. So we present all of those cases, inviting all the people from the industry to join us at those meetings and presenting their cases. So by the way, this is also an appeal to all of you, like if there are any Bitcoin developers here, practitioners from the industry, we are always open to cooperation, like come and join our meetings and let's try to be together on this front.
I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on what role should international bodies play in crypto regulation. Is global coordination necessary, or do you each feel we should embrace competition, regulatory competition between jurisdictions?
I think regulatory competition is probably good. Allow people to kind of vote with their feet. I would say I'm a little more skeptical than most people in the Bitcoin space, in the sense of, while there are many people, including a bunch of people in this room, right, digital nomads, people who are willing to go where, you know, the regulatory environment is most favorable to them, I do think most people are probably just going to stay where their like family is or where their friends are. And so if you start a company in you know, your home country, even if the regulatory environment gets bad, I think a lot of people are probably going to stick around. A lot of people will disagree with me on that. Ultimately, I think regulatory competition is good. It allows, what we're seeing is countries who want to be disruptive and want to be innovative to actually get a pretty significant leg up. And this is what you're seeing with a country like El Salvador, which I'm not endorsing, you know, everything that President Bukele has done, all of his decisions. There are plenty of separate conversations to be had about like the overall regime in El Salvador. But you know, it's an interesting case study to look at and see, why did this country adopt Bitcoin as legal tender? Like, what is the thought process behind that? And I think one of the big reasons, and a reason that doesn't get covered in the media as much, but ultimately has been probably the biggest success, is it put El Salvador back on the map, right? From a publicity perspective, from an investment perspective. There's been so much investment in this country because making Bitcoin legal tender signaled that, hey, we are open to fostering innovation, right? And sometimes, you know, the cynical part of me looks at policy in that way. Oftentimes, some of the most effective policies are not necessarily the policies that have the most direct impact based on their language. It's the policies that signal to innovators, to business owners, that you're welcome here, right? And so ultimately, like, that is what I think is good. I think a lot of these international regulatory bodies, they really are kind of following the lead of like what we're seeing in the EU and some of the worst parts of like American regulation, which ultimately end up being, I would say, like pretty pedantic policy-wise, like pretty infantilizing, right? They are focused so much on protecting people that they forget to let people, or not forget, that they stop letting people make their own choices. I think that is kind of like a commonality of a lot of international bodies.
Yeah, like when I think global coordination, like I want to ask, like global coordination in what? Like in a war against citizens, like an alliance of regulators that want to curtail our privacy and access to financial tools? Or is there a competition for citizens and their freedoms? So I would consider, like, what is the vector of this like global coordinations? Are those like countries interested in like sharing data between each other and then jointly chase after alleged criminals, or is there a coordination that would, for example, standardize some fiscal laws and make the alleviate the plight of like citizens, right? So unfortunately, like we see the former really. So when it comes to global institutions, their influence, their role is negative. The people we talk there don't know much or anything at all about Bitcoin and freedom tech, Bitcoin specifically. But it's also true that, and then again, it doesn't stop them to regulate those things, but it's also true that we are not seeing advocates for the causes. And if we are seeing any lobbyists, we are only seeing people who defend proof of stake instead of proof of work. The only exception was actually last year. We had a group of Bitcoiners going to United Nations climate conference to Dubai. And then you can see that this no support group results in various restrictive proposals. Right now, IMF is proposing to increase energy prices by 85% for proof of work. European Union is floating like energy threshold and stuff. And yeah, so we see a push for standardization and in a bad direction. And as you, Grant, mentioned, I think it's super important to like to watch regulations coming from both, from across the pond, really, in the EU and in the US, because they tend to emulate each other, and they also have a significant impact on other countries that emulate those jurisdictions. Yeah, and the last thing that I wanted to say is that right now we are on a mission to build a Freedom Tech embassy with a headquarters in Brussels, but also with a representation in the US, which will be a bridge between policymakers and the industries, the tech freedom industries. So I'm saying that just to invite you all to cooperate. If you feel like this is a space for you, then please just come.
Yeah, make your own international bodies.
We are nearing time, and I want to make sure we give enough time for questions. So I'm going to call on you because I see you right front and center. Do we have a... No, I'm going to come to you.
Thank you very much and congratulations. Seeing millennials explaining people like my age about this topic is very educating. I have some concerns about that. You mentioned Bitcoin. You concentrated in Bitcoin. However, there's BNB, there's Ethereum, there is WorldCoin. No? I think that there's a big complexity in understanding what crypto is. And that to me is a big, big vacuum that is happening. Not only with regulators, that happens, but also in the public in general. The best explanation that I have had is by millennials. I am still learning about it. No? I think that's this ignorance and this complication. Secondly, you have the financial system that feels threatened by cryptos. And they're looked at this system as enemies. No? And not without reason. No? Money transfer from banks and from cryptos is a huge difference. No? And they're making a huge difference, so they feel threatened. They don't speak out very well about this industry. Then you have central banks, also they have a challenge. And then you have the people that are crooks that take an advantage. So I think this is the environment, and we have to do something about it. By the way, I have to make a disclosure. Up until last month, I was part of the advisory board, the global advisory board of Binance. And it was a challenge the 2 years that I was there.
Thank you.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think with the first point of how do you deal with the educational problems around, what the heck is crypto? What even is this? One of the reasons, we're, like my organization is the Bitcoin Policy Institute, is not because Bitcoin is the only crypto, that has any value or that people are using. It's that we realized when people think of cryptocurrency, they think of it, most people think of it as a monolith, right? It's all, if you don't know anything about it, it's all one thing to you. And so when it's all one thing to you, well, our brains, our heuristics revert to pretty much like the biggest negative headline that we've heard about a thing, right? So if crypto is all one thing to you, then all you think about is a $32 billion scandal when a company crashes or when a CEO goes to prison for breaking laws. And so one of the reasons we're the Bitcoin Policy Institute is we realized in order to have serious, meaningful conversations, we shouldn't be trying to boil the ocean. We're not going to be able to figure this all out at once and educate everybody on everything in the next week or so. But let's hyper focus on one thing, right? Bitcoin, the first cryptocurrency, the most decentralized cryptocurrency, the most ubiquitous, the one with the largest network effects. And let's help people understand this. And if they understand this, then maybe that's the key to unlocking, understanding everything else. And I don't think we're alone in this effort because there should be, and there are, the Ethereum Foundation, there are, Binance lobbyists, right? Everybody is their own kind of stakeholder, and they should be responsible for, furthering education on their specific issue. But ultimately, I think, carving out a piece of this space is a key that unlocks understanding the rest. And if we try to talk about it all as one thing, then it all just gets jumbled together, and you get lost.
Yeah, I fully agree, but I do think that I would stress even more and distinguish even more still Bitcoin from the rest. So, okay, I see that there is competition is always good. So I'll be happy for cryptocurrencies to compete, although we have to be very watchful about it because there is also a lot of scam and people get hurt with cryptocurrencies. So how to filter it out, I don't have an answer to this. So there is a space for competition. Some cryptocurrencies offer you various different options, like Monero will grant you privacy. But then when it comes to Bitcoin, for us, it's not only about just focusing on one thing. There is just a significant difference between Bitcoin and everything else, because this is not only the first cryptocurrency, it's the only decentralized currency, which means there is no CEO behind it. This is, by the way, a realization of libertarian dream, because this is the materialization of property rights. This is the definition of freedom, where you have to be responsible for your money. Like, nothing like this existed before, and I don't think we are like realizing really this new thing there.
So yeah. Really quick, are we done? Last thing, I know you're just before we leave. I know you were working on an open source crypto project that is not Bitcoin, and again, so I want to leave open the space that, like, yes, Bitcoin has found some product market fit, right? Like, people find value in this and they use this, but ultimately, like you said, competition is good. The fact that you're building, something different, something outside of this, people find value, they're going to use it. If they don't, they won't, right? And it's the same with Bitcoin, it's the same with everything else. So keep building, keep trying to innovate, and eventually we're going to figure out what works and what doesn't, and what people ultimately find value in.
Well said. Guys, thank you so much. Really wonderful panel. It was great to hear from you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Vamos a tomar un pequeño break de 10 minutos, pero contaditos, para regresar a